Our current system is not meeting the demands of college and career now. We have students graduating unprepared, and the research confirms this. We know from surveys that many employers feel the need to either retrain or additionally train students. We have years of higher education remediation data indicating that students are not ready for college level work. And even worse, we have surveys of former high school graduates themselves that feel unprepared once they get out. For me, what's more concerning is the fact that we're giving students and families mixed messages or false signals. When we're issuing diplomas and credits based on seat time and barely passing grades, they graduate thinking that they're ready for the next step when in fact they're not. Competency-based education is a system of instruction where students advance to higher levels of learning when they master the current concepts and skills that they're working on, but it's regardless of time, place, or pace. And what it looks like is probably the most frequently asked question I receive, and honestly, it looks different from school to school, and that's okay. I believe it should look different in a small rural school as compared to maybe a large urban high school, because curriculum and instruction decisions should be made at the local level. So the level of technology, how textbooks are used, how classes are configured are all local decisions, so it will look different. Competency-based education is used synonymously with proficiency-based and mastery-based. So many states and school districts have chosen one of the three terms. I've even heard performance-based. The advantages that a competency-based education system brings is the flexibility that is allowed schools to personalize instruction, to be more flexible in the way to design classes, staffing configurations, bell schedules. So we free them of those outdated policies that may be buried in state statutes or board rules in order to allow them to be nimble. But to me, one of the most key characteristics is the transparency. So by definition, a competency-based system has a system of competencies, or sometimes we call them learning objectives, measurement targets, and that skeleton or framework is what provides transparency that we normally don't see in schools. At any given moment in time, a student, a parent, a teacher, or a parent knows exactly where every student is, what they've mastered, and what they need to work on next. State policies can either help or hinder full implementation. And sometimes that role of policy can seem daunting because you can be looking at things as big as assessment systems, accountability systems, school finance systems, but this is why we strongly advocate pilot programs. Pilot strategy is a reasonable and actionable first step for policymakers, so they don't feel like they need to have all of the solutions ahead of time. Because we also know that the solutions are going to be different in every state as well as which problems arise. And that's okay, but the pilot allows the innovative leaders that already exist in every state to step out and take that first step and create and be innovative and do things differently. But also then you have the educators that are teasing out those policies locally and helping the state carve out those solutions. So in Utah, we had a system of a strong advocate who'd been making incremental steps over the years to really move Utah to next generation systems of education. And he really felt that competency-based education was the right and appropriate next step. In Idaho, we had the governor, who was the prime champion as a result of the Task Force Improving Education's recommendation to move to a mastery-based system.
We decided to hold a summit that would include all of the players in the P20 arena. That included the State School Board, the Board of Regents, the Utah College of Applied Technologies Board, and the Governor's Office education leaders, including all legislators who served on any education committee and all legislative leadership. So we got all of those people in the same room at the same time, hearing the same presentations. The summit was a two-day event, and it had a powerful effect on the legislature being able to pass legislation that they knew would be supported by the local school districts, the state school board, and others in the education community. We did pass the bill, and it does call for competency-based learning to begin in Utah. The elements of the bill are first to create a task force to build out and put more flesh on the skeleton of what we had developed, and then to provide a funding mechanism for local schools who chose to adopt competency-based learning models. We had 3 phases of funding And we had a planning phase funding, we had implementation phase funding, and then funding for those who wanted to go to the next level. We believed that a pilot was the best way to go on this, because if we tried to impose it through a mandate or even an entitlement to every school district, it wouldn't be implemented with fidelity, and we're unsure what that would look like. Also, by having a pilot, we could have something that parents and educators across the state could look at and see what is working and then be inspired to implement it on their own. Other states can learn from Utah's experience that you have to do the planning. You have to do a pilot in order to create the vision for others to learn from. Mandates don't work. Statewide entitlements to do this on a full-scale basis don't work.
Idaho's mastery education law really grew out of Governor Otter's Task Force for Improving Education. And what the law does is enable our education system to move into the 21st century. So we're moving away from seat time requirements and grade levels to a system based on students mastering concepts and knowing that those students are then ready to move on and ready for the next level. House Bill 110 was passed in March of 2015 by Idaho's legislature, and it directed our State Department of Education to do three things. First was to conduct a public awareness campaign so that parents, educators, community members, everyone knew what we were talking about, what this concept of mastery-based education was. The second thing that it required was the department put together a committee of educators, the folks who are responsible on the ground to implement mastery-based education. That group, that committee, was to look at things that were standing in the way of implementing a mastery-based model. What were the obstacles and roadblocks? How do we overcome them? And then the third thing that the legislation required was to create and develop a process for identifying a first cohort of incubator schools or school districts to work on implementing mastery-based education. The Committee of Educators in Idaho who looked at first steps for implementing mastery education then also set up the process by which school districts and schools could apply to be incubators. The incubators, who were identified to be the first cohort to implement mastery education in Idaho, form the Idaho Mastery Education Network. They were required to be part of the network in order to be an incubator, and they're required to participate. And the network really is a professional learning community so that educators who are implementing mastery education in our state have a chance to communicate with each other, to share best practices and ideas, and also to share failures, if you will, to talk about things that work and don't work and how they worked through the process of refining what they're doing. Understanding that those 19 incubators that were identified are all at very different places in the process. Some are just starting and thinking about it and working through a design phase. Others have already implemented it for some grade levels and are looking to implement mastery education across their school or across their district. Idaho's timeline for implementing mastery education, we believe, was fairly aggressive. In December of 2015, school districts and schools and charters were invited to apply to be part of the first cohort of incubators. And then in April of 2016, 19 school districts, schools, and charter schools were identified to be the initial cohort to implement mastery education in Idaho.